Hey folks, welcome back to another edition of Somewhere Downrange and what that boy up to today. Well, you know, it's kind of rainy this week. Central Oklahoma's been getting plenty of rain. And at times the mist and the fog kind of made it look like an artist's conception of what you'd see in the movies of dreary, merry old England. And that put me in mind of maybe a little inspiration to do a little video on something that comes from that aforementioned area and was in use for quite a long time in Great Britain and in the Empire. Figured we'd drag out a little piece of history, and well, it's kind of a piece of history. It's a piece of history that's been modernized or sporterized, and we are talking about the British Lee Enfield, and this is a mouthful, number 4 Mark 1 B Series Sporterized 303 British. SMLE variant, and which stands for, those of you not in the know, short, comma, magazine Lee Enfield rifle, or by their nomenclature, rifle, short, magazine Lee Enfield, number 4, Mark 1, B Series. And if that makes you think that they were into naming things in weird ways, yes they were. And not only that, they had to, because from the middle to late 1890s all the way up through 1961, some variant or other of the long or short Lee Enfield weapon system was in use by the armies of Great Britain and England in empire building and empire maintaining, and it was used around the globe, not only by them, but in later years, in the 40s and 50s, even into the 60s, it saw heavy use in any place that there were people shooting at other people under the auspices of war. You could just about find one. Now, I can't go into great detail on all the different variants, because to do so would mean that we would have to do a video series on that specific subject, and I guarantee you by the time I was done it would be a series longer than Lonesome Dove. It'd make Lonesome Dove look like a cartoon. I mean, line that you go to looking online and getting information and talking to people that are collectors or extremely knowledgeable, and it's going to be a conversation that lasts longer than just a tall cup of coffee. I'll guarantee you that, because let me tell you, there were number 1s, number 2s, number 3s, number 4s, number 5s, jungle carbines. There were, and then you've got the numbers, and then you turn around and then you've got Mark 1s, Mark 2, Mark 3, Mark 4, Mark 5, Mark 6, Mark 7, and the list goes on almost ad nauseum, ad infinitum, and you are like, oh my God, if I'm going to learn about this, I'm going to have to buy every book on it and spend at least 8 months sitting in a prison cell, because that's the only way I'm going to have enough time to absorb it all. So I can't give you a lengthy history. I can say that for this particular sporterized variant, we have here with us today a SMLE number 4 Mark 1. Now this is the B Series. This is the variant of the Lee Enfield that came into production during the first two years of World War II. They basically were starting to get them cranked out and handed out to the troops in late 41, early 42. They were in the hands of all the British troops almost by 1943, halfway into the war. The number 4 Mark 1 series, the B series, this, incorporated new variations on the weapon that were basically the same platform. I can't go into those here because we don't have 2 hours worth of battery. So suffice it to say that the points I want to touch on this variant are the fact that the bolt can be removed by use of the bolt removal gate here. there's a single lug here on the top that runs in a groove, and this groove comes back, and this switch is depressed. That allows you to pull the bolt completely rearward, rotate the head of the bolt up, and remove it right out of the rifle. It's pretty simple. Other variations on the jungle carbines and the 5s had a groove actually here that you would just pull the bolt head past and you could rotate it up. And I've never dealt with one of those, but I would think maybe it might have been handy, and other times it might have been a pain if something got in that ramp and the lug was coming towards it and it hit that and you pulled your bolt and the head got flopped over and you were out of action. I don't know, it could have been a pain. I don't know. Anyway, I digress. I don't want to beat up this rifle. Now, what we have here is what, in my humble opinion, is just about the finest looking sporterized version of the SMLE on the civilian market that I've ever seen. And that's why I decided to go ahead and invest several $100s in it. In 1961, Britain was moving to the L41s, the L42s, the A1s, the LRs, and these were going out in mass surplus. Now, these variants were made all around the globe. They weren't just all made in Britain or England. They were made in Britain, England. They were made in India. They were made in Canada. They were made during the war, manufactured in Canada, in the U.S. In fact, there are some out there, and they're rare to find. But there are some number 4 Mark 1s and number 5s that are marked U.S. property. And the reason they're marked U.S. property is that was a requirement of the Lend-Lease Act. And so they had to put that on there. But no American troops, as far as large contingents or even medium, ever fielded this rifle as their main battle implement. But they were made here. They were made in Canada. They were made in India. They were all over the globe. Any place that Britain had set up empire shop, they needed a place to make their guns. So you can find a plethora of different places. This particular sporterized version was made in California. Thus, the 5-round magazine, this was the 60s, the mid to late 60s, and yet 5-round magazine. Now, this was done for sporterization. I'm sure they didn't want to deal with having 10-round magazines, not because of magazine restrictions. It was the 60s. Nobody in California really gave a shit about it at that point. But it lent itself to a much more slicker profile for a sporterized bolt-action hunting rifle than a 10-round magazine did. And so they used 5-rounders. Now, this particular weapon was sporterized, built, and manufactured by Golden State Arms out of California. And it is their Golden Eagle Mountaineer, or the Santa Fe Mountaineer. They had 2 different names. It got called 2 different names. It is in caliber .303 British, which is, for you metric system junkies, 7.7 by 5.6 R. It is a rimmed case. And it is really just a slick, cool old rifle. And when I saw it, I was like, hey, that's the sweetest one I ever seen. So I decided I'd go ahead and, pull the trigger and spend several $100s, get me some ammo, which there is some around still, and just see what this puppy's capable of doing. Now, when we speak of accuracy on a .303 British, we have to keep a couple of caveats in mind. The British never fielded this weapon with the expectation of the accuracy available from things like M1 Garands and things like that. Because of its design and because of some of the differences in barrel rifling, some barrels had 2-groove rifling, some had 4, and some had rounded edge groove. It was the accepted height of the bar that if you're really good basic infantryman, British infantryman, could take his SMLE, set it up at 100 yards, and put 7 out of 7 shots in a 2 1/4 inch group at 100 yards, he had a damn fine rifle and he was a damn fine shot. That was the degree of accuracy that was acceptable, because let's face it, engagements weren't long-range affairs, and it would get the job done just fine. So, when we set this out on the range today and go to fire it, I do not have any great expectations of firing groups of which I am normally accustomed to with rifles. And obviously, it is an iron sight setup. There's no optics. There were optics used, and the Brits did in fact redesignate and refit some of the very accurate, and they had to do test trials to find them, SMLEs that were capable of putting 7 out of 7 rounds in a 1-inch group at 100 yards and 6 out of 7 rounds in a 2-inch at 200 yards. And they refitted those rifles, and Holland mounted the scope mounts on the left side of the receiver, the flat side. They made a mount, they had a telescopic device for it, the whole 9 yards. Each device was set up and numbered to the weapon. And, you know, that gave them what they figured was an acceptable amount of accuracy for a sniper to engage out to 400 or 500 yards, which meant that with his basic telescopic 2-minute of angle, click, scope from the 40s, he could hopefully put 5 rounds out of 5 rounds in a 10-inch circle at 400 yards. Wow. Yeah, that was their accuracy grade. So I'm not expecting this thing to shoot wonderful groups. Now, we may roll out there and this thing just surprised the hell out of me. And that would be cool. I would enjoy that. But shooting iron sights, combat zero style, I'm hoping it shoots a fairly decent group. Now, we're going to be firing 2 types of ammunition today. We've got 150 grain soft points that I have had to modify, and 174 grain FMJs. And they are both the Serbian ammunition, the PPU, Pervitort. I don't even want to try to say the word. I am not Serbian. I've never practiced Serbian, and I don't want to screw up their language. But PPU, the blue box, you know. And it is brass-cased ammunition. Now, the 150 grain soft points that I have had to modify some. When I say modify, I don't mean I had to tear the cartridge apart. They had a very, very fat in profile soft point exposed lead tip. And when I say fat, I mean it bulged out beyond the angle of the ogive of the jacket in its mounting point. Whether this was by manufacturing or what, I don't know. But in testing, running those cartridges through the weapon, it became apparent very quickly that those soft points have a tendency to touch places that slim profile FMJs do not. And they touched places in such a way that with 5 rounds in the magazine, you were assured of getting at least 2 failures to feed, because the round would actually be bouncing up to the left of the rear of the chamber and locking up against the back of the bolster for the barrel. So, no bueno. Okay, we can't do that. And so my remedy was to basically just snip that exposed fat lead tip off, take the lead remaining flush down to the edge of the jacket, just like a what you might call a modified blunt-nosed flat point. And they feed very reliably. Thank you very much. I've had to do that more than once on certain kinds of weapons. Some are just not made for soft-pointed ammunition, and SMLEs were not made for combat-grade operational reliability with soft-point ammunition, because let's face it, you can't use soft-point ammunition in combat. That's a no bueno as well. NATO and Geneva said, no, 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 no. You can't shoot at human beings with something that's designed to knock a deer over instantly. So we have the 174 FMJs, we have the 150 modified, And while we're on the subject of that, let's talk about power. Through the years, I would talk to people now and then when this specific cartridge and platform would come up, and everybody like, 303 British, it's blah, 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 and it's okay, and there's, but by God, it can't touch a 0.6, and by God, 303. Well, of course, by God, there's a lot of calibers out there that exceed what the capabilities of that cartridge is. And you get some pros, you get some cons, but in the back of my mind, I always kept in mind that back in the late 80s, early 90s, back when I was a much younger man, quite slimmer and better looking, I had a friend, he's still my friend, he's still alive. He knocked a lot of damn animals down with a Sporterized 303 British. I think it was a Mark III. And that thing just knocked a deer ass over tea kettle, just whack. And so when people would kind of scoff or thumb their nose at the 303 British cartridge, I would have a tendency to want to remind them of the fact that it's quite comparable to the modern, for the times, the modern battle cartridges that were being fielded in World War II. The M1 Garand fires the 30 cal, the 30-06, and its preferred loading was 178 grain FMJs, and that ammunition was loaded to achieve muzzle velocities in the mid 2600, 2650, and with lighter rounds, even greater velocity. The 303 British 174 grain bullet achieves 2400 feet per second, so it's just a little low. But the 150 grain will achieve 2890 feet per second in the PPU loading. That is their published velocity data. That's not my estimation. So we're looking at 2900 feet per second, 2400 feet per second on the heavy, and that is a lot of energy. On the 170, over 3,000 foot-pounds of energy. That's a stomper, man. That is whacking some stuff down. It gets right up there with the .6. Your M1 Garand .6 ammunition, just right there in the same category. 308, 26, 2650, 2700 for battle cartridge loadings, not sporting commercial ammunition from Remington or Winchester made 20 years ago or even today. So it is quite a fine cartridge. It gives its share of energy and velocity to the intended target. Now, on the subject of that, I've got some representation right down here in front, and we've got from left to right a 308 NATO FMJ. We have a 150 grain Brad's modification, semi-blunt, squared off, soft nose. We have a 174 FMJ, and on the far right we have the representation of the 30-06. That is a Nosler bullet, but it's the same profile as a 178 grain FMJ 30-06 cartridge. So let's take a close look at these things and see how they compare in length and size and cartridge case, and you'll see that really, with the exception of the length of the case on the 30-06, with just a little bit more powder capacity by length, it stands a little taller than the 303 does. But keep in mind, the 303 British case is a rimmed cartridge, so you don't have near as much length between the base of the cartridge and where the cartridge wall starts. There's no groove, there's no gap, there's no rebate. It's just rim and wall coming up. So that's where the difference in the case length is really occurring. If they had the same type of case base, they'd be the same size, lengthwise anyway. And you'll also notice that the case of the 303 is just a little bit wider. it's still got enough powder to meet or exceed velocities of Lot 6 and shoot right there with it. Let's take a close look at these cartridges. Alright, now we got us a close-up look at the cartridges we were talking about. There on the far left is your 308/762x51 NATO cartridge, FMJ. To its right is the modified 150 grain soft point 303 British. Next in line is the 174 grain FMJ 303 British, and on the hard right is the basic 30-06. And you can see, for the most part, there's not a lot of difference. And like I said, between the velocities published and established for military versions of the 30-06 and the 303, they're right there just really neck and neck. Except for the heaviest bullets, and they're a little slower. 2,400 feet per second for the 174. But that 150, that paper is racing. It's racing. So, damn fine cartridges. Alright, let's jump back to the Purdy. What do you say? Stand by. Hey, welcome back. Alright. That gives you a pretty good look at those cartridges. And as you can see, there's no heavy-duty great variance in that. They're right up there. So anybody out there, I mean, you have friends or family or shooting buddies or whatever that wants to scoff at the 303 British, tell them, hey, not so fast, pard. Watch this video. Watch this video. I appreciate it. More likes, more shares. Hey, that'd be awesome. So that's the ammunition we're going to use. And like I said, I don't expect absolute wonderful precision from it. I just expect battle rifle grade accuracy that the Brits would have expected from their platform. And also, let's talk about the bolt for a minute. Some of you who are in the know have experienced this, have handled these rifles, probably know what I'm getting ready to talk about. Idiosyncrasy to this rifle is different than most of your other bolt-action rifles that you've ever had your hands on, in the fact that the striker of the bolt of this weapon is spring-loaded just like any other, but it is placed under spring tension load when you push the bolt forward after feeding around. Most of the other bolt-action bolts, the striker is actually cocked by the upward turn of the bolt. The bolt comes back, goes right back in all the way. On this particular weapon, when the weapon is fired and you lift the bolt, there's no initial heavy seize feel to the bolt. You can bring that handle up pretty fast. You bring it back, you eject the cartridge. When you come forward, the operational manual tells you, you will operate this. Because when that bolt gets about 1.5 inches, maybe 1.25 inches from its return trip ending, you encounter the bolster that cocks the striker. So this piece cocks as you're coming forward and bringing the bolt back into battery, which is a little different to get used to. You think, wow, why would they do that? And honestly, I spent hours online. I couldn't find a reason why other than just basic, that's the design of the weapon. So if you encounter one of these in a shop somewhere and you're looking at it and you open it up and you bring it back and you bring it forward and it stops and you really got to push it, don't go thinking that weapon is foobar. It's not. That is how that bolt operates. And it's, like I said, it's a little different. Takes a little getting used to. But once you get to playing with it and practicing bringing the bolt home, you come to realize that in the fever pitch of battle, when you're operating a bolt, you're probably doing so in a very deliberate, almost heavy-handed way. You're not going to feel that at all, hardly, because once you practice that stroke, the feel of that resistance just about all but goes away. I played with it for a little bit, and I was a little surprised. I was like, wow, you can do that. It's not so heavy that you can't, and it's not so heavy that it's always on your mind. So just be aware of that when you encounter one of these. If the bolt is heavy going back in when it's supposed to be. It's not broke. There's nothing wrong with it, okay? So what do you say, now that we've talked about that, let's grab our stuff, some bullets, the rifle, and a few toys, and get our asses out to the range and find out just what kind of accuracy is available in this Sporterized, American refitted, in California, 5-shot rifle short magazine Lee Enfield No. 4 Mk1 Series B. Not your killer. Stand by. Oh! This has got some really tall sights. You might have noticed that. I think that's done at the refit factory because there was just no other way to do it. So grab your stuff, grab your shit, let's head to the range, make sure you got your ammo, your ear pro, your eye pro, and all that other good stuff. The right ammo for the weapon you're bringing, I've seen that happen. And we'll get out there and see what we can find out about what really is a really pretty looking, Sporterized implement of war. Now you will notice there's no charger bridge for it. That's been profiled down to make it pretty for Sporterizing, but it is truly, in fact, an SMLE No. 4 Mk1 Series B. Grab your shit. Let's go. Come on.